Right. I'm going to do a brief recording on the two-sided argument and on the more complete version, which is the demythification. A two-sided argument basically has three components. One, here's what one side says. Two, here's why they're wrong. Three, here's what the truth is. Now, before we launch into this, it's important to recognize that many times there are more than two sides. For example, on the issue of abortion, there are people who are opposed to abortion in all situations, including if the mother has been raped, including if she would die, and the child would have severe birth defects. And then you have people who basically think that abortion is no more ethically confusing than getting a haircut. That's all that it is to them. And in between, there are many, many different positions. There are people who will say you should not have an abortion as a means of belated birth control, but if there is a health issue, it is allowable. Or you can use it to prevent a woman from having to carry a child if she has been raped or molested by a family member. Or simply if she's too young or too old could be another argument. Those are all different positions. There are not two sides on whether we should be quarantining and maintaining social distance and such during this pandemic. You could have the people who don't believe that it exists at all, that it's part of some plot by whomever, so there is no such thing as the COVID-19 virus, to people who say we should be completely isolated, you should not even be making contact with other people with whom you live, and frankly, we should be in PPE, which is personal protective equipment, at all times. And then you have people who, well, I'll give you my perspective. Because we are allowed out, I take at least one walk a day. I spend as little time indoors with other people as possible. I always have a mask on. I usually have gloves on at that time. I try to stay at least 6 feet away. And I will also sometimes add an extra layer of wet naps or anything that I think will give some more distance between me and what other people are doing. I have a triple layer mask. It is not a professional mask. It's not one that you would use if you were an actual medical care worker, because I can't get those. Okay, so there are many, many different positions on some issues. Other times we're forced into two sides. In a court of law, if it is a prosecution for a crime, there are only two possibilities. One is found guilty. The other is found not guilty. That doesn't mean innocent. It just means you're found not guilty. Yes, you can have mistrials and hanging juries and things like that, but essentially it really is guilty, not guilty. In a civil trial, there's a wider range, as in you might be found 100% responsible for something happening to someone else, or 0%, or some percentage of it, and therefore that would make a difference in how much you will have to pay in damages. Two-sided argument. England is the same thing as Great Britain. Reality, no, Great Britain includes Scotland and Wales. It's a flawed argument. I don't know that we'd even bother with doing the full 1, 2, 3 as far as the points. False claim. Ty Cobb is the all-time leader in hits in Major League Baseball. Why it's false? Pete Rose eclipsed him about 30 years ago. You're using very old data. Reality, Pete Rose has the most recorded hits in Major League Baseball history. False claim. There are foods that will burn calories. In other words, if you eat enough of them, you'll lose weight just from eating them. Reality, that's because of a mistake in how people are using the terms. There is no such thing as a food that is going to take more energy to eat than you'll get from having it actually in your system. Okay. Here's why we use demythification. If it's not simply objective facts, if there is a level of argument, we need to do a little bit more work. And the other thing that we're doing is we're trying to have the people who are on the side that we're opposed to not get defensive, or people who lean toward it, or at least who have family or friends who believe it. If I simply say, you're an idiot and a bad person and you're wrong, very few people are going to go, oh, that's a good point. I am an idiot. I am a bad person. We're going to fight back against that. We are going to become defensive. Or if I say that such and such a position is simply a terrible idea, but you go, that's what my Uncle Frank thinks, and I think my Uncle Frank is a nice guy, so I'm going to kind of oppose what you're saying. This is what we're trying to avoid with the demythification. So I'm going to do another quick baseball one. Ty Cobb was the greatest hitter of all time. Why it's believed. This is point number 2. Why a person might believe it. He has the highest batting average in the history of baseball. He has a .366 batting average according to baseballreference.com. Okay. Why that's flawed. Batting average is an incomplete way of determining whether a person is a good hitter. It tells us how frequently they hit. But if you know anything about baseball or softball or related sports, all hits are not equal. Hits can get you anywhere from 1 to 4 bases. Obviously, if one person gets a hit half the time that they're at bat, but it's always a single, and the other person gets a hit 4 out of 10 times that they're at bat, or 2 out of 5, almost as high a percentage, but half of their hits are home runs and the other half are doubles. In other words, they're accumulating far, far, far more bases. That's a better hitter. Okay? So the reality is there are better hitters than Ty Cobb in the history of the game. He is somewhere in the top 20. I'd have to look that up. If we went back to an argument on diets, if people said, okay, a new view is that keto, which I believe is you don't eat root vegetables, you eat high fat, fairly high protein, is an effective way of controlling your weight. Why people might believe that. Keto does have a big impact in short term. If people switch to a keto diet, often they'll eliminate some of the things that they don't need to eat, and they will see a weight drop. Reality, long term, there are no studies that I've seen, and I've looked at a few, that indicate that it is going to keep the weight off overall. It is something that's useful if you have inflammation problems. In other words, it was originally created to kind of control people having problems from things like arthritis and such. And then they discovered, hey, people might lose a little weight in the short term. Reality, in the long term, you have to make different kinds of changes to your diet, and simply eliminating entire groups of food is usually not going to be very effective. I'm going to try to think of one more flawed claim that the people of goodwill might believe. Oh, at one point, claim the earth is flat. Why would people of goodwill believe it? Because it appears that things are pretty much flat. I mean, there's hills and valleys, but it would make sense that the earth would be a solid surface. And because this is what we were told by people like Aristotle and other great philosophers, that we were told we should believe because they were virtually divine. Reality. And by the way, not everyone believed the earth was flat, even 2,500 years ago. A ship that sails beyond the horizon does not actually drop off the edge of the earth, at least not in our universe. Reality, once we could get ourselves up in balloons and planes and rocket ships, you can very clearly see the earth is curved. People can go around it and they're not going to the underside of a flat disk. Truth, the earth is mostly spherical, not perfectly, sort of like our friend the orange. Okay. Now, if somebody is a flat earther, I don't think I'm going to persuade them. If they've somehow managed to assemble together enough incorrect data and incorrect conclusions that they've decided that the earth is flat, I don't think I'll persuade them. We're not worried about that. We do want to make sure that that first point is as accurate as possible. In fact, if we can do it in their own words. Okay, so when on gun control, for example, you will sometimes hear, particularly the NRA, National Rifle Association, who I think, frankly, are not the greatest of people. I think that they are far, far, far too much in favor of the idea of let's let everyone have as many guns of any kind that they want. They were originally in favor of gun safety and gun education, and now they're more like, you want an M16? You want to have a rocket launcher? Go ahead. Okay. Now what I've just done is what I said you shouldn't do. I don't think the NRA has ever officially said, we endorse rocket launchers for personal safety. I would want to say what they actually do say. Or if you're talking about vegans want everyone to be vegan. No, Vegans would be happy if everyone were vegan. Vegans think that eating animals is bad for your personal health and that it's bad for the environment and that it's obviously bad for the animals. Report what they actually say. Big reason for this. If I know what the official position of a specific organization is, or if I know what most people in that group believe and do, and your version of it is some cartoon version, well, then I'm not going to believe anything else you said. If you tell me, and this is what I was told when I lived in Iowa in the 1990s, and they were talking about an equal rights amendment, feminists want to become witches, kill their husbands, and eat their babies. Okay, it is possible that there are at least two feminists who think that. That would mean that technically you could say feminists want that, as in those two. But no, that's not the position that most feminists have. You do want to explain why a person of intelligence and goodwill would believe it. In other words, you're saying it's not their fault that they've made this mistake. That's our second point. That's the demythification part. The third is to clearly show what's the flaw. The fourth point, the truth, may or may not be part of your presentation, simply because sometimes it might be, we don't know. We don't have enough data. We have enough data to know that this version is not it, but that we aren't sure exactly what is the truth. Okay, that's my brief discussion on demythification.